Regional economic cooperation and integration has been widely recognized and accepted as a necessary condition for the long-term sustainable development of African countries, since most of them are small in size. Through regional integration, it is believed intra-regional trade would boom, poverty reduced, industrialization hastened, and vulnerability to fluctuating overseas markets reduced. Among the leading advocates of African regional economic integration is Professor Adebayo Adedeji, the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, from 1975 to 1991. One of Professor Adedeji's closest colleagues at the ECA was Professor Samuel Kingsley Botwe Asante, who served as Principal Regional Advisor in Regional Integration to African Governments and Coordinator of the Multidisciplinary Regional Advisory Group at the Cabinet Office of the ECA.
Professor Asante is a life worth emulating.
He has made enormous contributions to our understanding of development processes on the continent.
His preachings are such laudable and loud that if African governments would listen to what SKB Asante stands for, that would be our emancipation.
For a man of his repute, of his international repute and of his caliber, you would expect somebody with chips on the shoulder. But this is not what you find with Prof.
As a brilliant academic, a prolific writer. He's produced so much, sometimes one wonders how he comes by that capacity for enormous work.
Professor SKB Asante was born in this village called Swabe near Achemda in the eastern region of Ghana, but that did not dampen his quest for academic laurels.
My father and my mother were illiterates, and being the only surviving son of my mother, whose children were about 9 or so, would not allow me to leave home and go to school. It was with difficulty that I was able to attend school, not in my place where there was no school, but in Akimsodro, far away. That's one. The second one was that even though I got scholarship to go to Achimota and Fatima Desaddle through the various entrance examinations, not the common entrance examination. Those days, each college had to organize its own entrance examination. 3 times, my father said I had to complete my SR7, so I have to get my SR7 certificate and show it to him before he will allow me to go to secondary school, despite the pressure from my teachers. I did that, but then the third one, by the time that the examination, the result came, I got the result that I had got scholarship and so to go to Achimota or in fact, the school that reopened. So the only one which had not reopened was Ebuakwa State College. So I went to Ebuakwa State College.
From 1949 to 1952, and then moved on to Achimota School. From 1954 to 55, then entered Legon and graduated Bachelor of Arts in History. He studied privately to gain his Master in Science, Economics, and then subsequently Doctor of Philosophy from London University. He has held appointments, academic appointments, in several places, both in Europe, America, and then Ghana. He was professor of political science at Legon. Currently, he's part-time professor with LESIA, Legon Center for International Affairs. He has published widely. In fact, there are very few academics who can compete with the publishing record of Professor Asante.
Through his assiduity and perseverance as a student, he became a multidisciplinary scholar, a qualification which later in life put him on a pedestal for international assignments.
The idea of being a multidisciplinary scholar actually helped me a lot because regional integration involves a lot. You must have the background in economics, a background in history, a background in philosophy, a background in a number of these things. And being a multidisciplinary scholar I felt that this was an area that I could specialize.
He was discovered by Professor Adedeji, who really gave him the biggest break of his life within the context of the international community.
Professor SKB Asante was invited to Hamburg in Germany by Friedrich Ebert Foundation soon after ECOWAS was formed. There, he was requested to give a talk on ECOWAS. He did his best, and the interest shown in his presentation greatly encouraged him to do more in development and regional integration.
The United Nations was involved in African development, and one major area which is common to all of the African countries is the area of regional integration. Why? Because African countries gained independence, should we say, generally in 1960. And at that time, the colonial government didn't leave us in terms of infrastructure. And the South African countries were too small. Many of them, and they're all LDC, least development countries. None of the countries in Africa could stand on its own. So there was a need for African countries to come together. It was this which was in fact made it possible, particularly through the ECA, where I was, the Economic Commission for Africa. African countries adopted regional integration as indeed a major aspect of its development. That's the only way that they could actually challenge the development program that they were facing.
In spite of the significant strides made in African regional integration, bad leadership and poor governance still persist in most African states. However, after the replacement of the OAU by AU in 2002, many African leaders have committed themselves to eschew bad governance, corruption, and abuse of human rights. And Professor SKB Asante plays significant roles in the transformation process, albeit unobtrusively in the outdooring of NEPAD and APRM.
At a time that we were struggling for independence, I'm not talking about only Ghana, but the whole of Africa, there was every hope that when we've driven away the colonial masters, there will be peace, there will be democracy, there will be rule of law, good governance. That was the idea. And Nkrumah also assured us that, seek ye first the political kingdom, and all else will be added unto it. We cheered Nkrumah and said, yes, let these white people go and we'll get everything. But then the white people went away, not only in Ghana, but repeat in the other African countries. But what did we actually see? We saw that there was indeed naked dictatorship. There were presidents who, in fact, wanted the presidency to be a life one, and so on. We experienced that. There was no rule of law. Detention, people were detained without actually resorting to court, and so on. So there was a major problem. When we put all this together, you can see that what Nkrumah said could now be turned to the opposite direction, that seek ye first the political kingdom, and everything else will be subtracted from it. So this was the situation. And as a result of this lack of good governance, the result of lack of a rule of law, the lack of human rights, lack of transparency, it became extremely difficult for African countries to make any progress in the area of development. So African leaders actually met in Yamoussoukro in Cote d'Ivoire, and then adopted NEPAD and said that NEPAD should be part and parcel of ECOWAS programs. And I was invited by ECOWAS and the World Bank at that time to come to work out, to go travel throughout the ECOWAS countries, and then come out a report on the type of institutional machinery which exists in these 15 countries, which will then embrace ECOWAS, that implement NEPAD and ECOWAS. But it was just at this time that in the year 2003, the Afghan leader felt that, look, we need actual implementation of this idea of human rights and so on. And so then APR, Africa Peer Review Mechanism, was then adopted.
What that particular mechanism tries to do is to give Africa the responsibility of managing its own affairs and of trying to police each other. And you need somebody with the breadth of experience of Professor Asante, who thinks big, who does not only think at the country level, but thinks comparatively in terms of how other African countries are also doing, to be able to judge what should be the ultimate values which Africa should push for. In other words, so we have an African agenda and we have a set of African principles which will guide our affairs suited to our particular condition.
Ghana was among the first 6 African countries which immediately acceded to the Africa APRM. Ghana didn't stop there. Immediately, Ghana said, look, we actually need to start implementation of the Africa peer review mechanism. And so in March 2004, President Kufuor, in consultation with Parliament and then Cabinet and so on, came out with names, 7 names, which will be then the council members, National Africa Peer Review Mechanism Governing Council. And yours truly, myself, appear to be one of them. So the 7 of us then started to take Ghana through the process. And by January 2006, Ghana had completed doing all the work what is required. A report was submitted to the African heads of states which have acceded to the APRM. So the major meeting in Khartoum in Sudan. So President Kufuor, who was the leader at that time, was called upon to respond to questions from his own peers. At the end of it, Ghana was hailed. It was in fact Ghana's finest hour, the first African country to have gone through the process. And so President Kufuor then said, now look, we are not dissolving the council. Go ahead to implement this APRM program. So this is what some of us have been doing. And I must say, Ghana was the only country to share experiences. So from that time, from 2006, what we have done are basically 2 things. First, to share our experiences as a Pan-African country with other African countries, to share with them, tell them what they should do. Because we don't want to be just the only island in the ocean and so on. We just want other African countries also to have democracy, human rights, rule of law, and so on. We found out that the National Africa Peer Review Mechanism Governing Council found out that the real people are those in the district. So a decision was taken to have the Africa Peer Review Mechanism implemented right in the district. And as a result of it, we have established 170 district oversight committee. That is in every district. I felt that there was a need for it to document what we have been doing. So I came out in 2006, a book entitled Implementing the New Partnership for African Development. Then again, if we've seen what we call the APRM Watch, something like a magazine that we have developed, and we keep on writing about all these things. But I am bringing all these things together in the form of another book, that is Ghana's implementation of APRM, a decade of implementation, that is from 2003 to 2013. I would like this actually to be launched.
There was the time when ECOWAS contracted him as a specialist to see how best we can have a single currency within the West African sub-region. And at that time, the French were forcing their way through to make it possible for the non-UEMOA countries, non-French-speaking countries, to sign on to the CFA. And the government, contracted him, to find out what can be done. It was his a report, together with Ambassador Bankwa, report that cleared the way for a second monetary zone to be established.
The idea of the 15 West African countries having a common currency is a major provision of the ECOWAS Treaty. In fact, one of the major aims of the community was we are talking about trade and so on. And so we did have a common currency. But unfortunately, as you know, ECOWAS is indeed a sub-region with many of these phones and so on. East Africa didn't have that problem. Even Southern Africa didn't have that problem. We don't have the problem. We have the problem of the French-speaking countries having their own CFA, and we have problems of the other African countries, or other West African countries, which do have inconvertible currencies. Our cedi, as you know, will not go anywhere beyond beyond flour and so on. And then we have the Leone, Sierra Leone, it's the same situation. Then Gambia and so on, particularly the English-speaking countries, we have inconvertible currency. So there was the problem, how should ECOWAS come out with a common currency? So the first thing that we proposed was that if there is one common currency, monetary zone, then we need a second monetary zone for the rest. It is out of this that a decision was taken here in Accra in April 2000. It was decided that there should be a second West Africa monetary zone. Saying is very easy, we all like it, but how would this actually come about? So first, we decided that there was a need for these non-CFA zones to have a body, a technical institute, which will be monitoring the issue or see its implementation. So the West Africa Monetary Institute, which is in Accra at the moment, it was actually put up there, established in March 2001. And then again, it was decided that there was also the need to have convergent criteria. And this is indeed a major problem because they need to be on the same plane in terms of inflation, in terms of borrowing from the central bank and so on. So there were 4 principal convergent criteria and then 6 secondary convergent criteria.
And so came the idea of the ECHO, which we are battling with. So came the establishment of the West African Monetary Institute. So came all those rationalization exercises that are going on to put in both the OIMWA and the ECHO together, the CIFA and the ECHO together, someday, sometime. So he's done a lot for ECOWAS.
In his works, what he asks us to think about is the long journey that Africa has taken to get to the 21st century, wherein we have come up with a development strategy that has been driven essentially by African leaders. And he argues that this is an opportunity for Africa to make good on its development promises to the people of the continent.
Professor SKB Asante did a lot of work in Namibia and in South Africa. But when he was first appointed by the United Nations, he was posted to Zambia as the head of Department of Development Studies of the UN Institute for Namibia. The United Nations had set up that institute to train the young and old Namibians so that when Namibia gained independence, they would not run short of expertise.
So it was there that I arranged various programs, not only regional integration, various programs in development. And you will be surprised to know that Tom Mbeki from South Africa was one of those coming to my class. Sam Nujoma, the former president of Namibia. And then Gengob was indeed, first it was the director of the institute, and then later, when he left, I became the director. And he was the first prime minister of Namibia. So I trained them. In 1990, Mandela also was released from prison, and I had to lead a team to assist President Mandela, his transitional team, to assist in the various development issues. But the area which they asked me to do more was to review the curriculum that academic side, curriculum of the various universities in South Africa, because you know, under the apartheid, the issue of African studies was not known. And even the personnel, see, I had to do a lot of bringing in some Africans to be appointed to many of these schools. So in that one, they actually appointed, in addition to my responsibilities, I was appointed extraordinary professor of the University of Pretoria, and then many of these other universities.
Professor SKB Asante had a stake in the various regional groupings established in Africa, and ECOWAS was one.
In the case of ECOWAS, the ECOWAS heads of state felt that there was a need for them to review the ECOWAS treaty. And so a committee known as a Committee of Eminent Persons with Major General Gawan, the former head of state of Nigeria, as chairman, and myself, then my boss, Professor Adedeji, we were the Nine Nation Technical Advisors. And then we actually reviewed the ECOWAS treaty. So the present treaty, which ECOWAS has at the moment, actually came from the report that we actually submitted.
Professor SKB Asante recently celebrated his 80th birthday, but he is still active. At the moment, he is concerned with capacity building of students at the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, LESIAD. According to him, Africa needs astute and perspicacious personnel to deal with the continent's commitments.
The real contribution is how to build up the skills of the personnel to enable them to manage the Ghana situation, I mean development issues. That has been worrying so bad. Those of us from the United Nations that have been worrying us, that we don't have the real capacity. We have the people, but the training was a problem. So I did three things, I mean, as a way of contributing to that issue. First, I joined the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy, and where I actually teach regionalism, regional cooperation, and so on, as a way of, in fact, developing the human, the capacity of the young men and young women. These are graduate students that are doing masters and also PhD. So that is part of my work. But then that one, I didn't have the time. So given that I go to, it's only in the second term that I go to LESIAD. Gradually, we are helping to build up the students or the personnel in that area. That's one. The second one was that GIMPA actually invited me to be a resident scholar. So what I did was to organize a series of conferences on regionalism and African development.
He calls attention to the need to what we can call knowledge building, enhancing our awareness and understanding of regional integration. But he's also talking about building capacity for the technicians or staff that man and woman the secretariats at the sub-regional and regional levels. And that, he argues quite decisively, it cannot just be a question of arming people with technical skills, but ensuring that they have the skills and wherewithal to promote a proper integration of people, goods, and services as intended by the liberalized processes that we're now embarking upon. He has written a number of books, published a number of book chapters and monographs, all on the subject. And in each of his very, very invaluable pieces of work, he has added dimensions to our understanding of African development.
At the 75th anniversary celebration of his alma mater, Bakwa State College at Chebi recently, where he was one of the key guest speakers, he presented 10 copies of each of his 6 books to the school library.
I know him to be a philanthropist, and many young people there have benefited from his largesse.
What can be more gratifying, more fulfilling, and more rewarding than celebrating service to humanity? No doubt, this is a proud moment for Professor SKB Asante and his wife, Mrs. Jane Asante. Call it a glorious celebration of life, and you would not be wrong. All these young men and women, beneficiaries of Professor and Mrs. Asante Educational Trust Fund, cannot conceal their depth of gratitude, but express it spontaneously to their mentor and philanthropist. Indeed, life looms large and more meaningful when one forgoes one's comfort and interest to transform the lives of others.
Sometimes I say to myself, hey, suppose I was born in Accra, Adabraka or somewhere, or I was born in Koforidua or Cape Coast. What type of challenge would I be confronted with? There will be no challenge so far education is concerned. So I am very happy that I have been born in an area where the challenge to education is one of the most prominent issues at hand.